Well, good evening, and welcome back to the second lecture in our series on the Wisconsin idea, past and present. We're really delighted to have you here and again invite others to come, so don't hesitate. As you've got friends who are standing around asking, what in the world is a Wisconsin idea? Tell them there is a place you can find out. But tonight, I'm going to start just by giving a context for the presentation. Let's start with a recognition from work by Gwen Drury. Gwen is here. Yes. Gwen has written a very important essay on the Wisconsin idea, the vision that made Wisconsin famous. And it is very comprehensive about the things that developed. And what she tells us is that the Wisconsin idea, at its heart, represents a vision linking the state and the university, in this case, the University of Wisconsin. Now, in the early years, that is the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the reference to the state meant quite specifically the political unit Wisconsin. But over time, the reference moved from being not just the state of Wisconsin, but the citizenry or the general public. So this is a concern then about the link between the general issues of the public and the university. Drury describes this as a partnership, the state-university partnership, and says it was really, the idea was around supporting democracy and the placing of authority in the hands of the people. The university then was to be a partner, and there are two important issues with reference to the partnership. The university as partner would develop knowledge especially for legislative action. But the university as partner would also work to educate the citizenry. And it is towards that educational role that we are turning this evening, because we want to examine assumptions about how education could advance democracy. We want to consider questions about what was the actual pursuit. So it's one thing to have a set of goals, it might be quite something else to bring those to reality. And we want to think about matters warranting attention if there are to be links between teaching, learning, and democracy. A little more on the background. You learned, or you knew this already, but what was reinforced last week was that John Bascom, such an important force in the evolution of the Wisconsin idea, that Bascom sought to instill in students the idea of an obligation to serve the state that had made their education possible. Now, that's where we need to think of state in the broad sense, because many of the people who are here at the university now are not products of the state, the political entity of Wisconsin. Nonetheless, the argument is still to hold that there were obligations to serve, to act on behalf of the larger citizenry. A more detailed view of the obligations of the university probably comes from Frederick Jackson Turner, who was professor of history at this university from 1889 to 1910. Many of you are probably familiar with his frontier thesis, in which he argued that the U.S. was very much a function of the kind of engagement with the frontier. But tonight, I'm more interested in his ideas about the university and teaching. He offered this view. He says, by graduating successive armies of enlightened citizens, able to think for themselves, governed by knowledge and reason, the public university will safeguard democracy. So So students, consider this kind of obligation placed upon you. No small matter, but you're to be a part of this enlightened army of citizens who can think, who will be governed by knowledge, and who will safeguard democracy. Well, these are the questions. How do these views on the university, on the university higher education generally, and the UW specifically, resonate in later years? What issues and controversies emerge? You heard some of the issues centered on the early formulations of the Wisconsin idea. You heard those from Professor Hogler last week. But tonight, we have the advantage of hearing from Professor Harry Brighouse from our Department of Philosophy and School of Education. His interests specifically span political philosophy, philosophy of education, educational policy, and I'm sure I've left out something. His extensive writings include a volume on the aims of higher education. And he's made comments about the depth of support in Wisconsin for the Wisconsin idea. He acknowledged that depth when there were proposed changes into the university's mission in the budget request in 2015. The changes would have diminished the priority given to undergraduate teaching. His talk tonight will undoubtedly shed light on the conclusion he reached in looking at the Wisconsin idea and the budget, as well as the conditions he regards as essential for linking teaching and learning to the Wisconsin idea. So please join me in welcoming Professor Brighouse.
Thanks, and thanks for, is that okay, the sound? And thanks for having me. So I'm going to focus mainly on the present, not on the history, but the history obviously informs the present, and I've got a confession to make. So I came here in 1992, and for the first 7 years of teaching here, I never heard anybody say the Wisconsin idea. I mean, they might have said a sentence with Wisconsin in it and another one somewhere with idea in it, but they never said Wisconsin idea. And it took one of my undergraduate students, Corey Mason, to alert me to it as a guiding idea. And perhaps to my credit, the reason he did that was that he'd read some of my work and he thought, well, this is relevant to the world we live in. It's not just philosophy that, is totally abstract. And he even I feel sorry for the legislators that he did this to. He even got me to, he was an undergraduate student, but he made me come with him to the legislature and meet in various assembly people's and senators' offices, in which I'm sure they thought, well, we really like Corey, but what is he bringing this guy for? Corey's conception, and I think it's the conception that we normally hear when we hear people talk about the Wisconsin idea, was that insofar as my work was relevant to the Wisconsin idea, it was really my research. What he was trying to do was draw me into service, draw the research into service. But what I want to do today is shift the perspective, as Cora said, away from research and service, and think instead about the element of my job, which is my job description, which is the most important element of my job description. It's the one that for most faculty here, I don't want to be crude, but for most faculty here, it's the element that brings in almost all of the revenue, right? And that includes lots of faculty in STEM, and that is teaching, and primarily undergraduate teaching. For people like me who work in the humanities, or for those who work in the interpretive social sciences, I think it's I'm going to explain why teaching is absolutely central to the Wisconsin idea for us, if we actually want to attend to it at all. We're unlikely, most of us, to contribute a lot to the crafting of legislation. We're unlikely, most of us, to be creating research that will help to train skilled agricultural labour, that will help to improve agricultural technology, or that will help people to build bridges, or that will help people to mark cancer, right? I'm sorry to break it to you, but in philosophy, very little of what we do is going to help with those tasks. Anybody in English literature? Same goes for you. Maybe the rest of you are good. It's easy to see how somebody in engineering or somebody in the business school or somebody in the School of Pharmacy can contribute to the economy, if you like, through their research. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's easy for them to do so, especially when we think about the state itself, because whereas maybe 80 years ago academia was a local and regional phenomenon, most research, most professors, to be honest, their career was teaching, even at an institution like this. But for those that did research, it was often a response to local or regional problems. Academia is very different now, and we have internationalized, it's essentially an internationalized profession. I promise you there are people who here in all the schools I mentioned, and in philosophy and in English literature, who are internationally renowned for what they do, and whose colleagues don't read what they write. And whose colleagues don't read what they write because they're busy reading stuff by people off in the Netherlands or in Australia or in California, right? It's a super specialized profession now. That's where the status is. That's where the money is. That's where the incentives are. And to get people to work on local or regional problems takes will. It takes incentives, but it also takes will on the part of the people who are doing it. Okay. So, as I say, it's pretty clear that somebody working on psychotropic medication or somebody working on bridge building or that their work can contribute to the state and beyond. It's not so clear that the same is true for the people in the humanities and the interpretive social sciences. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the titles of a few recent papers. Almost all of them are in philosophy. Okay? I Can't Believe I'm Stupid. Mental Time Travel, Dynamic Evaluation and Moral Agency. If you're an egalitarian, how come you read bedtime stories to your children? I should say that one is a criticism of my work, which is good. Able to Do the Impossible. Talking with Vultures. That's in a philosophy journal, not in a zoology journal. Is it zoology when you deal with vultures? It must be, mustn't it? Can I Kill My Younger Self? Time Travel and the Retro Suicide Paradox. Best of all, I Do Not Exist. Okay? I'll throw in an English dissertation, A Necessary Luxury, Tea in Victorian England. Now, you might think Brighouse is teasing us here, because in fact these scholars are just giving their work really hip titles. That's useful research. It's just that these people have a taste for the... Well, you can tell yourself that, but you're wrong. I've looked at the papers. I love the titles, they are hip. But I just tell you, that research is at least as unuseful for the people in the state of Wisconsin as the titles make them sound. Now, some scholars are even defiant about the unusefulness of their work. As with the professor, and this is not, I should say, a professor at the University of Wisconsin, who says her next book will be called Cacophonies. Sorry, I'm not sure I can read this. It is brilliantly written. The Excremental Canon. And what this book will do will examine the deeply excremental nature of the modern and contemporary French canon and work to combat the deodorization of the French literary imaginary. Now, when I showed this to Diana Hess, she said, "Oh, you're just going to make fun of things." And I'm not, actually. I'm not mocking the work. I think unuseful work, it can be valuable even though unuseful. That useful and valuable are not the same things. And I have written equally unuseful work, albeit with less hip and less unuseful sounding titles, because I'm not hip and I can't. My titles tend to be, there's a question in the paper, and the title tends to be the question, right? What should we think about X? I think it's good that people produce research in the humanities and the interpretive social sciences, and it's even good that they do it here as part of their jobs. We're engaged in a large enterprise which has and does produce insights that can have value for people. If everyone were trying to ensure that all of their work was useful, many insights, in fact, would be missed. Some insights that really are useful depend on work that nobody thought was useful when they were doing it. Now, some work really is valueless, right? And some scholars are just sort of unredeemably self-indulgent. But we're engaged in an enterprise, and the enterprise works best, I really believe this, when we refrain from over-policing it. And that includes an internal sort of refraining from over-policing. I don't want people to be thinking all the time, is this going to be useful? I want them to dive in and do the work, though I would like them to think sometimes, is this going to be useful? But most of us in the humanities and interpretive social sciences, and I should say I think this is also true for most people in STEM, should not fool ourselves that our research will normally contribute to the well-being of the state and beyond. It's not going to be, for most of us, our research that describes our contribution to the Wisconsin ideal. How will our research, how do we contribute? Well, the way we contribute, if we contribute at all, is, as I said earlier, through our teaching. It's through our teaching, which is most of our job, if our research contributes at all, it's only through that mechanism, right? There is no way in which, I can't believe I'm stupid, can get out of the philosophy, the abstract sort of philosophy world, except through the teaching mechanism. You don't go out and patent the idea and then get a company and then market it. That's not the way it's going to work for most of that kind of research. Okay, so now, I have a prediction about what you ought to be expecting now. So what you ought to be expecting is a hackneyed and cliche-ridden defense of majoring in the humanities. Okay? Now, and as you can tell from the fact that I said it would be a hackneyed and cliched-ridden defense, I'm not going to give it to you. It's not what I'm going to do. Now, I do actually think it's good for people. I mean, I think it's good for some people to major in the humanities. I think it's better for some people. I think it's better for a lot of people than most people think it is. I will, since my own discipline is philosophy, I should cite the great philosopher Marco Rubio, who I should say during the campaign. This is a man who can change his mind. So during the campaign, he said that philosophers were more valuable than. Sorry, he didn't. He said that plumbers were more valuable than philosophers. And then some people talked to him, and he changed his mind. And he said, no, philosophers are really valuable too. We need them. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how we teach in the humanities and the social sciences. So if you talk to people about taking humanities courses in the hackneyed and cliche-ridden defences, this is what they will say. They will say that there are they'll emphasise three different kinds of benefit, if you like. And the one that the people in the humanities like the most is the humanist benefit. Students who take humanities courses are enriched by them. They become more rounded human beings. They come to understand the human condition better. The second kind of benefit that people will refer to is what I would sort of say the citizenship benefit. Partly because they better understand the human condition, and partly because we teach critical thinking, whatever critical thinking is. I'm not going to define it, but I'm not a skeptic about it. I think it is there and it matters, but we often talk about it. It's often a cliche. Critical thinking, okay, do we really teach that? We'll get to that in a minute. They're more able and more inclined to contribute to the public good through engagement in politics, broadly conceived. We really desperately need more people who are able to think through the positions that other people hold, who are able to think sympathetically and empathetically with the positions other people hold, who are better able to understand their arguments, who are able to change their own minds, and who are able to engage in deliberation across difference that results in mind changing. If you don't think we need more of that now, well, you know, I've got a gulag for you to send me to. I mean, I don't have it, but I bet you do. And finally, there's the professional benefit. They become better equipped with lots of skills and dispositions that will enable them as professionals to serve better the people they work for. So that's what people will say when they're telling you to take humanities courses and when they're telling you to major in the humanities. Now, suppose they're right about that. We'll get to that in a minute. How do these benefits serve the state of Wisconsin? Well, there's one way, which is that the students themselves are from Wisconsin. But the other way, the way that matters, I think, much more to me, is that at least those of them who stay in Wisconsin, and even those who leave, go on to be professionals, citizens, and friends and neighbours. They participate, and they participate in a privileged way because they're graduates, and our graduates are particularly privileged because they're our graduates, but because they're going to end up mostly in the top, somewhere in the top 20, maybe 15% of the income distribution and of the status order. They are going to participate in the economy, in the moral economy, and in the political economy. We educate, and now I'm thinking especially about our campus. It's true of other campuses in the state, but I'll say why our campus, I think, is special. We educate members of the most valuable professions. Now, we're going to have disagreements here about exactly which professions are the most valuable ones. And I'm going to give you I'm not going to list all of the most, this is where I'm going to get out of it. I'm not going to say any are not valuable, although some are not. But I'm not going to name all the ones I think are valuable. But here you are: school teachers, school principals. My belief is that there are about 3 times as many public schools as there are people capable of running them well. Right? Childcare workers, nurses. You know what? Nurses are those people that doctors help to make people better. Right? Social workers, police officers, human resource managers, counsellors. We educate them, and they go on to serve the population of the state and beyond. And if they're better educated, this is the hunch. The hunch is that if they're better educated, that is, if they have more of the knowledge and skills that enable them to do their jobs better, more imaginatively, more humanely, then they serve the population better. Now, the elite character of the institution means, there are lots of other institutions in the state training nurses and training teachers and training school principals. We train more of the people who are going to be leaders in those professions than most of the other campuses do. That's not because we're great, it's because we're lucky enough that the people who are going to become leaders in those professions will come here, if they can, often over other campuses. All of which produce lots of leaders, but which on average probably produce fewer than we do. Okay. Now, I've identified the supposed humanist benefit, the supposed citizenship benefit, and the supposed professional benefit. And I know that Diana Hess is going to spend a lot of time next week talking about the citizenship benefit. And that's my excuse for not talking very much about it myself, right? Instead, I'm going to focus more on the professional benefit. It's partly because she's going to do that. It's partly because I think the professional benefit of the humanities is the most disputed. It's the one people are most skeptical of. It's the one that Marco Rubio, until he became enlightened about one thing anyway, questioned. So I just want to mention, here are some traits that Forbes 500 CEOs say they need in their workforce. I'm just going to mention a few of the list of 7. Ability to work in a team structure, ability to make decisions and solve problems, ability to communicate with people inside and outside an organisation. And when they say communicate, they mean communicate. What that means is saying what you mean and meaning what you say precisely and concisely and clearly, and interpreting others and what they mean even when they don't say it precisely, concisely, or clearly. The ability to plan, organise and prioritise work. The ability to create or edit written reports. Those are the kind of traits that CEOs say they value the most in the people that they employ. They believe that they can teach lots of the technical skills once you're on the job. These are things they think they don't know how to teach you when they hire you. And I love this quote from David Autor, the MIT labour economist. He says about the labour market our students face, which is different from the labour market I faced. It's different in many ways. It's more fragile, it's more uncertain. Certainly ever since 2008, our graduates have faced a labour market that we don't understand very well, that they don't understand very well, and in which they, for good reason, I think, feel, do you have the word gypped? Gypped means hard done by, ill treated. And it's to do with lots of reasons, including sort of very probably temporary reasons, but also including mechanisation. This is what he says. He says, human tasks that have proved most amenable to computerisation are those that follow explicit codifiable procedures, such as multiplication, where computers now vastly exceed humans in speed, quality, accuracy and cost efficiency. Tasks that have proved the most vexing to automate are those that demand flexibility, judgment and common sense, skills that we understand only tacitly. For example, and I love his examples, developing a hypothesis or organising a closet. Right? And very few of you have been in my office. And my wife, who is here, has not been in it for 20 years. But those who have been in my office will know that organising closets is not my strong point. So this is what I think Autor is saying, and I think this is actually what the CEOs are saying. We now know how to computerise and mechanise many tasks for which we know the algorithms. And there's a lot of emphasis in American education in learning and applying algorithms. But the deep point is that the interesting problems, the difficult ones, the ones that we really have to solve if we want to make progress, are those for which we don't know the algorithm. I'm not saying they don't have algorithms, but we don't know what the algorithms are. And we approach them without knowing what the algorithms are. What makes it worse is that we often approach them with other people who think they do know what the algorithms are. And we approach them and have to solve them together with other people without the algorithm. That requires the communication. That requires the making of the hypotheses. And it requires, the organisation, if not of closet space, of conceptual space. But so those are the skills that people will say, you get that from the humanities. None of that happens by magic. signing up for a course in the humanities and listening to someone talk for 75 minutes at a time, even somebody as interesting and erudite as I am, doesn't accomplish that. The benefits only arise if the students actually learn these things, which in turn only happens if the pedagogical methods are appropriate. Well, are they? So I'm on a committee that oversees the collection of vast amounts of data about undergraduate students. Some of the data I'm not, well, I think some of it I'm not allowed to tell you what it is, but there's lots of it. It's all right, it's nothing personal, it's like credits, this, that and the other. And at a recent meeting, discussion turned to the value of reading and interpreting Shakespeare. And I had to remind my colleagues that reading and interpreting Shakespeare could not be equated with taking a course on Shakespeare. One of my icebreaker questions in my smaller classes is, name a novel that you think you should have read but you haven't. And about a year ago, one of the students said, well, that would have to be all the novels on the syllabus in last semester's English Lit Survey class. Right? She got an AB. I mean, she's smart, all right? I mean, you can tell she's smart from the joke, yeah? No, you can blame that on the fact that we use so much large lecture teaching, and there's some truth to that, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But here's another little anecdote that happened about a year and a half ago. A student came to me after I taught a large lecture class, and at the end of it, a student who was actually in the ROTC, she came to me and she said, I really, really love this class, you know, can I take another class from you what are you teaching next semester? Because I've completed my major, the major was in the social sciences, I won't name it, and I've room for some electives. And she said there was more discussion in this class than in any other class I've taken. This was a large lecture class. And I said, I was a bit shocked, I knew what the major was, and I said, wow, don't they offer small classes in your major? She said, oh yeah. I mean, she didn't say it in that accent, she had a Wisconsin accent, but you know. She said, I'm currently in 2 20-person seminars. The professors both lecture for 75 minutes every session and tell us everything we need to know from the books that we're supposed to have read, so nobody reads and nobody talks in class. You can't blame it all on the use of large lectures. I think large lectures may have their place, well, I think they probably do have their place. I think they're very problematic, and I'll say something more about that. But it's not just about that. It's about other things as well. By the way, there is, it turns out, going to be a 5-second, I was hoping my wife would leave before this, there will be a 5-second visual aid in a moment. Don't look at it for now, you don't need it. I just wanted to know whether it would work. So, look, anecdotes are one thing, but there's a systematic feature of our profession that would lead you to expect that we don't teach very well. And it's this. We're not trained to teach. We're not selected for our potential or our skill as teachers. We're not promoted based on our performance as teachers. And we lack an infrastructure for professional learning. Now, that, I think, would be absolutely fine if teaching were easy. So if you think teaching's easy, no problem. Like, anybody can do it. If it were, for example, just a matter of displaying our own knowledge and learning. I've got a fair amount of knowledge. I'm a philosopher, so I don't know very much. But, you know, I've learned a lot. But there are lots of other people who know a lot. I could go and I could display all that learning. It's not hard for me to do. But my hunch is that, in fact, college teaching, even college teaching, that is inducing people to do what it takes to gain the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and dispositions that enable them to be good citizens and good contributors to the economy, broadly conceived, is not at all easy. In fact, it's difficult. And it's difficult for rather obvious reasons. So take any class of 20 or 100 people. They're all different people with different levels of preparation, different kinds of commitment to the course, different levels of motivation, and different levels of concentration, ability to concentrate, and they're able, different ones, to concentrate on different things. The knowledge might be easy enough to acquire, sometimes, but the skills of critical thinking that the humanities exhort us to develop are difficult and complex skills. Now, what does it take to develop them? So here's what Carl Wyman, who was he still is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, but having won his Nobel Prize in physics, he decided to become an education researcher and a promoter of different educational practice. And this is what he says. The most basic principle every teacher should know about teaching this sort of thinking, that is critical thinking, is that the brain learns the thinking that it practices, but little else. To have students learn to recognize relevant features and make relevant decisions more like an expert in the field, they must practice doing exactly this. The longer and more intense the practice, the greater the learning. Now, I'm just going to show you the 5 seconds. You've got to watch carefully because the action is really fast. Okay, you watching? I'm going to go back to the beginning. You see what happened? That ball went at 95 miles an hour and the guy caught it. Right? Now, I could describe what he did. I could spend 75 minutes describing what he did. Or you could just watch him do it over and over and over again, and then you'd be able to do it, right? No, of course you wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, I can take this down there. Yeah, you have to practice. You have to practice and practice and practice. Why think, I mean, no disrespect to Rory Burns, but why think that thinking about difficult, complex problems for which you don't have an algorithm is any different from, frankly, diving to catch a ball? You don't think you could do that without practice? Why think you can do this without practice? Now, in the sciences, no doubt a lot of practicing is facilitated through problem sets, and no doubt a lot of practicing is facilitated through labs, when you have lab work. But if the skills in question involve concisely and precisely communicating complex ideas about problems for which you don't have an algorithm to other people who don't know what you know and are not skilled at charitable interpretation, and interpreting the communications of other people who are not skilled at communicating concisely and precisely about the problems for which they don't have an algorithm, listening to one person talk at a chalkboard, uttering their carefully worked out thoughts, and writing a couple of essays or taking a few tests, especially multiple choice tests, and especially inexpertly designed multiple choice tests, will not do, right? You can't expect that they're going to learn the stuff. They're going to learn how to do the stuff that we're promising that they'll learn how to do from that. Charles Eliot's comment made 150 years ago when he was president of Harvard, he says, "The lecturer pumps laboriously into sieves. The water may be wholesome, but it runs through. A mind must work to grow." Now you can say, well, they can do that outside the classroom, can't they? They can do the thinking and discussing and reading outside the classroom. Well, yes, but first of all, you have to design the course to get them to actually do the reading, right? You can't design things so that they can get through and get their A.B. without reading any of the novels, if you think that you need them to do that outside of class. But to me, the big thing is talking. The big thing is discussing with people, discussing difficult problems with people, discussing things with people who you disagree with, remaining friends and on cordial terms with those people. And yes, that can be done outside the classroom, but there are very few public models of it. It's not encouraged in high schools, by and large, because of the sort of atomized, individualized schedules that we organise their lives around, and by we I mean us, the people who run the university. We organise the lives of the students with all these options and all these electives and all this and that. All that means that they don't have much, even if they have the will and desire and the models for how to do it, they don't have a lot of occasion to practice those skills outside the classroom. And I just think they're not going to practice those skills outside the classroom unless they've already started learning how to practice them inside the classroom and have gotten a taste for them. Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to figure out how much longer I'm going to go. They said 40 minutes. That would be another 5 minutes, and I think I will use all those 5 minutes. I'm not really apologising. So, I've provided a couple of anecdotes suggesting that our teaching methods don't always match the promise. And when that's true, I think it's for one of two reasons. So one is that teachers lack the skill to do the teaching well, and or they lack the conditions in which to exercise the skill well. I just want to say a word about the conditions. When I walked into this room, I thought, wow, this is a great room. It is a great room in some ways. It's not as great as other rooms. For example, you're all in rows, you're not in a circle. There's a room in humanities, which, now I don't want to offend anybody, but there's a room in humanities that I know for sure they spent $75,000 refurbishing. It used to be one of those rooms with all these broken chairs in it that you could move around and had terrible acoustics and whatever. They spent $75,000 turning it into a room in which the seating is all like this, and it's like being an American in coach class. It's not big enough to justify a lecture, but lecturing is the only way. Basically, they turned it into a room from a horrible room that you could learn in into a lovely room that you can't learn in. That's designed to promote bad teaching, basically. You need the right room, big enough for them to sit in a circle, small enough for them to hear each other, allowing you to walk around the room so you can train their attention and deflect it on each other and their ideas and deflect it from you. You need a room in which you can't hear the skateboarder on the roof, or ideally a room in which there is no skateboarder on the roof. That's my dream. So you do need the conditions, and you need, what you can achieve in a large lecture. I don't know. I'm sure we can achieve more than, for most of us, I'm sure we can achieve more than we do in the large lecture. But when I hear somebody say, defeated students say, well, I'm not the kind of person who learns well in 300-person lectures, I sort of find myself wondering, who is that kind of person? And wondering whether there are 300 of them. But maybe there are. So I want to turn now to the issue of skills. I'm really going to try and go quickly through this. I think one of the things, here's a test for you. My job is supposed to be, equal teaching and research with service sort of tacked on. That's true of most tenured faculty. Go and ask a tenured faculty person, of the last 10 professional conferences they went to, how many were about teaching? And they will not say 5, unless they're researchers on teaching. And I'd be surprised if they say 2, right? That's an indication of where the value system is. How do you change that? So administrators have lots of tools. They can require departments to develop and use measures of learning rather than access. The people who are trying to take all this down, I can just send this, to Cora, and I'm saying this toward the end of the lecture after you've been typing notes. But I can just send it, and then you can have the notes. You can establish financial and status incentives for people who invest in becoming better instructors. You can create institutional-wide pre-tenure instructional mentoring programs, post-tenure incentives to recognise high-quality instructors and get them to participate in those programs. There's lots of reform that's there to be done. But I find it really frustrating when discussion ends at what administrators can do. We have a great deal of discretion over how we use our time, especially post-tenure. We know, or we should know, that our skills are not where they could be, and we should feel an obligation grounded in the interests of the students and in the Wisconsin idea more generally, to work systematically on continually improving our skills. So how do we do that? Well, is Danny here?
Yes.
You don't want to swear, do you?
I don't want to what?
Well, it's just what you said in class the other day about the literature. Right, you she said that professors should read the literature, but she used a word in between read and the literature that I was surprised to hear in a classroom. So there is a literature. It's there. It's we can observe colleagues teaching. We can talk to them about it. We can have ourselves filmed. We can watch the film back with critical friends and with students. The single worst bit of teaching I think I've seen is myself. 10 years ago, I got a video of myself running a discussion, and this last year I watched it with another group of students most of whom had taken classes with me, some of whom had taken classes with me before, and I was really relieved for them to be surprised at how bad it was, because I thought, okay, they're surprised. This isn't what they're used to. You can do that. The best thing I've done is I've hired students to coach me. So I've hired students to sit in the room, watch what I do, say, that's not working, that is working. You should know all their names by the end of the 4th week. You can cold call, it's great to cold call, but tell them that you're going to cold call before you do it. And if you do that, you've got to tell them that you're going to cold call, and if they have nothing to say, that's okay. My department holds now monthly brown bag meetings that are focused on problems of practice, right? So we pick a problem of practice every month, and somebody presents very briefly about it, and we talk it through. Some people know the literature. We often bring in literature. So there are things that we can do without systemic reform. I want systemic reform. I think the Wisconsin idea requires systemic reform, but the Wisconsin idea, first of all, doesn't stop at systemic reform, and secondly, continues and should continue to inform our practice even in the absence of systemic reform. That's it. I don't mind taking some questions now.
I hesitate to even stand up here. This is so important. I'm always reminded of an account in which someone said, I taught my dog to talk. And the person said, well, that's incredible. They turned to the dog and say something. The dog said, woof. He said, wait a minute, I thought you said you taught the dog to talk. I said, yes. I said I taught the dog, I didn't say he learned. So this whole matter about it's not teaching, and certainly teaching as it's often done, is not the same as learning. So what we've been listening to are the sets of skills that are to be advanced, and that the mechanisms often used, the conditions that we are often deploying, those are not conducive to the matter of learning. And thus, I'm very much struck by we had quite a bit of interchange about how this could all be thought of. And he says there are the proposed benefits from education. That's what some of the early advocates of the Wisconsin idea were all about. But these kinds of benefits don't just come by magic. And that's the question then of what does it take to try to ensure that the sorts of skills important for being citizens, being able to participate humanistically in what goes on, and being professionals, those take a lot of time and effort. And so I'm very indebted to the kinds of observations, because they do provide us a link from some of the things that we talked about last week to many of the things that we will have to continue to probe as we ask about the Wisconsin idea, not as just as an abstraction from some long ago, but as something that still has resonance for us today. But one of his comments was that one of the key attributes should be listening. And so I'm not here to talk. We're here to listen very much. And so we will try to, well, he will respond to any questions, comments, or things that you might want to exchange with one another. And so let's see, anybody want to Okay, here's the microphone that's coming over.
My voice carries.
We'd like to capture it on the microphone if possible for the people who are watching in the live streaming, please. Thank you.
Okay. This is a classroom, and you're our instructor right now. So, assuming that politics is also school, what are you trying to get us as teachers of politicians to do? And the second question is, why aren't you in the School of Education?
I have an affiliate appointment in the School of Education. So, what am I trying you as teachers of to get you as teachers of politicians to do? I think that, look, I've only had one politician go through my classes, I think. There's only one that I know became a politician, and that's the one I talked about at the beginning. He became a state assembly person for 10 years, now he's the mayor of Racine. I would like to, you should ask him what he thinks he learned. He will tell you that he learned a lot of what I talked about. How to think more abstractly, how to think how to distinguish values that matter, how to distinguish between a value commitment and a policy, a claim about policy, how to make simple distinctions between, facts and values, if you like, how to think about evidence in the light of your values, and how to reason with other people about their values. So Corey is, when he was in the Assembly, I think he was one of the further left Democrats throughout his time in the Assembly. He befriended Republicans. I think that those friendships were tested in 2011, more than tested. He had Dale Kuyanga, who's now I think the chair of the Senate committee, became close friends with him around ideas, around thinking about and arguing about ideas. And both of them have been in my classes, talking with students, and I hope that students see that as, see thinking together as a model, and that they think that even if they're going to become politicians, while understanding that if you're in politics, there's a lot of thinking against as well, and you can't avoid doing that. You can, but if you do, you won't get elected. So, but you've got to. That can't be all you're doing.
But you are suggesting we be teachers of politicians.
Yeah.
We have one shot at it each political meeting.
I thought the response was in part going to be, show up next week as well.
Oh, yeah, and I didn't say that. And show up next week as well. Yeah, Diana will have a lot to say about that, and it'll be really good.
Yes, because Diana Hess, who will be emphasizing the kind of matter, she's talking about taking up difficult issues, and she means that for everybody. So the political classroom she's been working on says it's not just a matter of trying to translate to somebody else, but it's also trying to listen and hear what's going on. So that's going to be the discussion next week. And probably Professor Brighouse will say more later on, but I think we have another question or comment here. No, Pam. Right?
Yeah, I'm just hoping younger people wanted to talk, and I'm filling the space, so I'll be quick. I'll just toss this out just to be provocative. How is your argument, first of all, I'm agreeing with your argument, but thinking about incentives and stuff, there's a lot of research that says there's a negative relationship between student evaluations and how much people learn in a class. And of course, a lot of research that says student evaluations are really discriminatory on the basis of gender and race. But in fact, the major way that university professors are evaluated for their teaching is student evaluations, these metrics that are known to actually not be correlated with learning and to actually discriminate. So how does that fit into like incentive structures and better learning and Wisconsin idea and stuff?
So there's a cynic in me that thinks that it's very convenient for professors that we use student teaching evaluations because we know how flawed they are. And as long as they're used, every measure of us, we can just say that's really flawed. And if we developed other measures, we might actually have to hold ourselves accountable for them. I would like to see. There are two things. So I would like to see the disciplines develop measures of learning. And I'd like to see them use those measures of learning to inform collective improvement. Yeah, of course they inform individual improvement, but you're a sociologist, you know, actually, even if you teach large classes, the sample size is small, you know, and there are all sorts of intervening variables and whatever. But collectively, we could learn something from those. What I care much more about is not the accountability side of it. It's not the evaluating people side of it. It's the figuring out how people can improve side of it. And so I want measures that enable. I want measures for improvement more than measures for accountability. So, by the way, I'm totally happy to be held accountable in all sorts of ways. I actually would like to be held accountable more. I think it's kind of nerve-wracking not being held accountable. But I really want to know whether my students are learning the things that I care about them learning. So I need measures for that. And then I want to know whether my colleague Dan Hausman is teaching those better, because I want to know what he's doing. If he is, I want to know what it is he's doing, because I want to be able to do that. And of course, some of what Dan does, I can't do it. That's not. I'm not expecting. I don't want people to go and replicate other people exactly, but replicate bits of what they do, the bits that you can do. So that's the answer.
Okay.
Yes, sir. As one who occasionally attends the Midwest Sociological Association meetings and the American Society for Criminology meetings, your predecessor always has students and people represented. Why don't the University of Wisconsin participate more in national and international programs as it once did?
What sort of national and international programs? Go on.
The American Society for Criminology has people coming from all over the world to attend those conferences, if you're familiar with it. And I do see Chris Jurgen and his students often from the University of Minnesota Sociology Department and former criminology really participating and giving some really terrific papers, and I'm wondering why my alma mater here does not do so.
Well, I can't speak for the Association of Criminology, but I know a lot of professors here, and a lot of them spend their time, a good deal of their time, at national and international conferences. So maybe we don't have enough criminologists. Maybe.
But to go to some of your earlier comments, they had to do with, if we're going to improve the learning of important skills, it's not just enough to say, go to a meeting.
No.
Especially if those meetings are really not around the issues of how the
Ma'am, what I'm talking about is learning things here, doing research here, and informing the world of the good work that goes on at the University of Wisconsin.
Oh yes, and you're right, there's a lot that goes on, and it's a lot that's recognized there too. This is saying, what else can we do to give the same kind of attention to improvements in teaching and learning as we do on the research side,
yeah,
and to an extent on the service side.
Yeah.
I think we have another question or comment over in the side of the room.
So you mentioned that work that's unuseful, or studies that are unuseful, aren't necessarily unvaluable.
Yeah.
And you said we shouldn't lie to ourselves and tell ourselves that what we're researching is useful, but we also shouldn't over-police ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm an art history major, so I struggle with this all the time.
I'm a philosopher, so you're not.
And I was just wondering if you could explain more this idea of not over-policing ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm glad you asked that. So I think let's try the analogy. Let's try and do an analog with STEM, right? So STEM, of course, everybody understands that if you could get a cure for cancer, that would be, well, nearly everybody understands, that would be a really good thing, right? And so we have an enterprise that is focused on finding a cure for or finding cures for cancers, yeah? But that enterprise, the success of that uses tools and uses concepts and uses knowledge that has been developed and gained in completely different enterprises, in basic research, a lot of which, frankly, the researchers weren't thinking oh, in 50 years' time, cure for cancer. They were thinking, wow, this is really interesting, right? This is so interesting. I'm going to think about this. My godfather came here about 20-something years ago to open this building. And he was here 50 years ago as a pharmacy postdoc. And he did work on mitochondria as a pharmacy postdoc, you know, whatever, although it was a long time ago. His work has ended up really mattering for all sorts of medical research. I just promise you, that's not what he was thinking about. He was thinking, wow, this is so complex and interesting, and here's a puzzle, and that's what motivated him. That's what motivates, think about philosophy now. So philosophy, I don't believe that the philosophers who developed the sort of pragmatic side of philosophy of language that ended up really mattering an awful lot in linguistics and for the development of AI, I do not believe, and I know, you know, this is in the 50s, I don't believe they cared at all about that. And I don't believe that they would have done that work if they'd been trying to develop AI. They would have, because they'd have been trying to develop AI and we'd have missed a whole lot of stuff. So that's the thought. The thought is that if you try to be useful, if everybody's trying to be useful, they'll be too focused on the present. And long-term progress depends on not being focused on the present and sometimes not even being focused on the problem. But lots of people need to be focused on the problem and the present. So that's why we mustn't over-police. But you know, we should be, as a discipline, attentive. There's a division of labour, and we need to think about that division of labour.
Does that answer?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
Question behind you.
So you say that learning to think critically needs to be practiced, and that should be the sort of the pedagogy underneath or behind teaching, or at least the most effective teaching. Looking back over time, do you have a sense for how that view has been seen? Is it something that is embraced sometimes and then forgotten, then embraced and then forgotten? Yeah. So was this absolutely the way that Bascom taught and now it's different? I suspect not.
That's a great question. So here's something. So, you know, we can think about the history of ideas and, you know, you go back to, well, you know, I went back 150 years to Eliot. Well, he was saying this 150 years ago, then you get Dewey saying something like that in the 1900s. Now, here's the thing. We don't know very much at all about what actually happens in classrooms. We do not have, so the Gates Foundation recently, not that recently, put cameras and, you know, put video, and the video is like, you know, the video is self-turning video, and there's videos pointing to students, there's videos pointing to teachers in thousands of classrooms, got lots of footage. There are people analysing all that now, but that's K-12. There is no similar effort in higher ed, and I don't think we know a lot about, well, I mean, we just don't have a lot of data and we certainly don't have longitudinal, like we don't know what was happening 20, 30, 40 years ago. At least we do know that 40 years ago, there weren't 20 students sitting in the room shopping for shoes. You know, we know things like, and we do know that there are now, and I just promise you that there are. I mean, you go and you go and stand outside some, Ed Sciences, ironically, has some classrooms where you can sort of stand and you can look in without anybody really noticing what you're doing. And if you sit at the back and you look, you wouldn't be surprised. Like, so I mean, I would really like, I don't have Gates's money. If I did, I'm not sure, you know, I don't know. If I did and I was constrained to spending it on research in higher education, the thing I'd be doing is I'd be spending it on that. I'd be trying to find out what's actually happening in classrooms and trying to analyse that and trying to figure out, you know, how that correlates with what learning is actually happening. Because, you know, Pam's right. Like, the student evaluations don't correlate well with learning. We don't know a lot about what correlates well with learning because we haven't, you know, we don't have the data.
This is kind of a follow-up to the last question, or it's very similar. I think I wrote down that you said that somebody said, if it wasn't you, the brain learns the thinking it practices. Who said that? And I just think that it's a really important thing, and in my own teaching, I try to have students do things, not just listen and read. The doing is really important. So anyway, I'm so glad you said that, and I want to know more about it.
Yeah, so that's a direct quote from Carl Wyman, who's this Nobel Prize winning physicist who has sort of basically leveraged lots of money from the National Science Foundation and his Nobel money and other money to try and improve physics teaching in particular. And that the essay from which that is drawn is coming out in the next issue of Daedalus, which is the Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and so the next issue, which is out in, 3 weeks, is a special issue on teaching and learning, undergraduate teaching and learning. And in fact, there'll be an event on that here on October, an event sort of around the journal on October 30th. I'll try and I don't have a flyer or anything. We haven't sorted it out exactly what we're going to do, but whatever, I'll make sure it gets to you and further out. So.
Okay, any other questions or comments or anything else? Well, again, this has been a very powerful presentation that will resonate because it has implications for so much of what we'll be doing during the entire semester and beyond. And I think about it in terms of, even though this was talking about the classroom and people might think that's the only people who should care should be the students, but not if we think about what are possible benefits to a larger population. So in this state and beyond, the quality of the interactions, the continued advancement becomes important to everybody. And that this is going to be very much then something that will continue during the course of the semester. And I'm thinking of a later set of discussions that will very much relate to how people associated with the university and beyond must take those kinds of skills, those attitudes into working with communities. And this idea of listening, being able to listen, will come through in any number of ways. But the whole discussion is about, these are not easy skills to develop, to transmit. It takes a lot of interaction. So with this, please join me again and thank you, Professor Brighouse.